With the latest agriculture news from across the state and nation, it's time for the AgNet News Hour from AgNet West. Here's your host, Sabrina Halverson.
Good morning, and thank you for joining us this morning here on the AgNet News Hour. We're starting out the day today with an important conversation on cattle grazing and how it can help prevent all these wildfires that we get here in California. Joining us for this segment is Sherry Brennan. She is a cattle rancher in Sonora in Tuolumne County. All right, Sherry, so you recently testified about the use of grazing to help prevent and lessen wildfires. And this is such an important conversation for California, obviously, because of our wildfire season that we have every year, and it seems to just be getting worse and worse. Can you tell me a little bit about what it was like testifying?
Yeah, I really appreciated the opportunity to be here in DC and appreciate that the Congress is looking at some of these solutions because it's just so critical. We have a crisis in California around wildfire. And so just to be here and have the chance to speak on this, it was a great experience.
So you talked a little bit about the impact of the 2013 rim fire, which was in Tuolumne County. Can you tell us a little bit about that for those of us who haven't heard the hearing? Tell us a little bit about what you said and also share some of your thoughts on that fire.
So the rim fire broke many records, and it was one of the first really large landscape fires where we saw a change in fire dynamic. And by that, we had a much higher percentage of high severity burn in that fire due to the excessive fuel loads on the landscape. When you see those high severity burns, they completely alter the ecosystem. So in many areas on that fire, we went from what was a mixed conifer forest to a brush field. I'd call it oak woodlands, but a large percentage of that didn't really even reforest in oaks. It just came back in very dense brush. And we saw huge impacts from air quality, issues within the county. Schools were closed. Tuolumne County depends on recreation income. We're the north entrance to Yosemite National Park, and our tourism industry was devastated. We are the watershed for the Stanislaus Forest is the watershed for virtually the entire Bay Area. In particular, we have the city and county of San Francisco that was in the burn zone, and their system, they're still suffering the aftermath of siltation, log jams. We have pictures of acres of logs now that are in some of these reservoirs. And I'd say that it's not just the Hetchy system, but we have MID, TID. Those are all important reservoirs that are the water for what is the breadbasket for America. If we look at that Central Valley, say from between Merced County and Stockton, going from east to west. So the watershed is incredibly important, and it had just major impacts to air quality that were felt for literally hundreds of miles away. And then it was devastating for our local economy. That doesn't mention, and I didn't mention because often we concentrate on what are our immediate losses to the individual ranchers. And that was really the piece I was here to speak on. But going beyond what was the devastation for a couple of ranching families that were within the rimfire perimeter, there were just the effects and the losses were much more impactful, devastating to a much larger community.
And you also in your testimony, you highlighted that targeted grazing can significantly reduce these fine fuels. So how would you see implementing the process or that practice more widely across high-risk areas that we have in California?
Targeted grazing is really just a variation on either the density, number of animals, the duration, the time that they're out there. And very specifically, I'd say that we have some immediate places where we could implement it without a lot of additional analysis. We graze to what are a set of standards and guides on our allotments. And so take the post fire scenario where you have 40% utilization. When the cattle are held off, for example, with the rim fire, we went out with partial numbers the first year after, and then we were back to full numbers by the second year. But I would argue that we should have been going in with double the numbers at that point, because the cattle will help control the brush. They will help consume some of those fine fuels, and we could have done it and still stayed under the standards and guides that are for allowable use. As it was going in with only the allotment numbers, we were way behind. And so by year 4, 5, 6, the brush now has become so dense that the next fire is going to be more catastrophic than what the rim fire was, just because of the sheer fuel load. And we also are not doing anything to benefit the pieces that standards and guides are there for, i.e., individual species protection, browse standards, those are in place to meet certain thresholds. And we're basically having an adverse impact on all of those because we're not managing for that high density.
Kind of a simple way to put it, and this is probably oversimplifying just that last point that you made, though, that a lot of these rules were put in there to protect native species or endangered species of plants. But since we're not taking care of the land and preventing these wildfires, we're actually wiping out many more acres of it through these wildfires that could have been somewhat prevented or made less impactful through grazing.
Absolutely. In an attempt to protect, we actually ended up destroying 40 nesting sites. We wiped out, I believe, a fifth of the known great grouse sites in the state of California. A fifth of those were wiped out in the rim fire. And the measures that are put in place to protect some of these animals, whether it's plants, wildlife, amphibians, birds, we actually end up destroying it. And we destroy it in such a way that they don't come back.
We're going to take a quick break, but we will continue this conversation with Sherry Brennan right after this. I'm Sabrina Halverson. This is the AgNet News Hour, and we'll be right back.
Welcome back to the AgNet News Hour. Here's Sabrina Halverson.
We're talking this morning with Sherry Brennan. She is a cattle rancher from Sonora, which is in Tuolumne County, and she has seen firsthand the effects of wildfires in California. And we're talking about how cattle grazing can help lessen those wildfires. As a California rancher, what challenges would you say that you face when it comes to balancing wildfire prevention with regulatory compliance? Again, some of these regulations that we're just talking about clearly are not working, but you still have to follow them because it's the law. What is that balance for you?
That balance is going to be finding some relief through the regulatory piece that Congress can implement. And that was why this particular legislation, I think, can be so impactful, because it says that now we need to implement. We don't need to keep studying this for another decade and debating it. We need to implement. And there are scenarios and places where we can do it. We can do it immediately and actually do it in a way where we are still grazing under the current standards and guides that are recognized in the Sierra Nevada framework.
So there is some proposed legislation. Do you think that this legislation would be effective in addressing the challenges?
I think it's a good starting place. I think there's more that we can do with regards to authorities that will allow flexibility, because that's what we're not flexible. We are set to, we graze within a certain season, within a certain number. And that doesn't allow for flexibility when conditions are changing, i.e., drought, more rain, fire. There are so many variables. And so this is a great start, but we need to find a way to be more nimble and more flexible to address the challenges that are in the future.
So you've testified, you've had that experience, you've got to interact with these lawmakers. What role do you think ranchers like yourself can play in helping to shape public land policies to improve fire resilience and land management? So you guys, with the ones who are actually out there working the land, what role can you play with legislation?
That's a great question, because you hit it. We are the ones that are out there. We have, in many cases, there's generational knowledge about how these landscapes react to certain prescriptions, certain treatments. And so I think that ranchers need to be at the table. Their experiences, their direction is fundamentally so important in how we're going to get success around this. And that's what some of the organizations that we have, it's like PLC and NCBA, our state cattlemen's associations, are really front and center and trying to have the ranchers with a seat at the table as we go forward in looking at what are the best ways that we can provide some flexibility. And because especially in cattle ranching, it's a very, the investment is there needs to be some assurances over time, because it is a very asset intensive endeavor. You can't just go out and buy a dozen cows to put someplace and then put them on the shelf. You need to have some feed assurances over time. You need to have feed capacity on the seasons where they're not on the grazing allotments. And so to build those numbers that we would like to see out there, you need some real assurances that there's some time that allows for these operations to get the job done. Because it's not like you can go and buy 100 cows and then be turning them around every 6 months. That's not realistic.
Ranching doesn't work that way.
It doesn't work that way.
We will continue this conversation with Sherry Brennan right after this. This is the AgNet News Hour. I'm Sabrina Halverson, and we'll be right back.
Welcome back to the AgNet News Hour. Here's Sabrina Halverson.
We're talking this morning with Sherry Brennan, a cattle rancher from Tuolumne County. Looking back at the rim fire that we started the conversation on and the community recovery process after that fire, how important is collaboration between ranchers, policymakers, and even environmental groups, which might seem like some crazy utopian dream, but still, in combining these groups together in preventing these future catastrophic wildfires? Is it even possible to get these three groups to be able to work together?
I believe it is, and I believe we have a good example of that on the Stanislaus Forest. YSS, which was the 70 Stanislaus Solutions Collaborative, was in existence prior to the rim fire, but the rim fire really bolstered the necessity for all of these groups to actually sit at the table in a really meaningful way, and put some of their personal biases aside and work towards getting some restoration done. And I will say that they were successful in doing that. They started with a project called Cyril 1.0, which was the social and ecological restoration across the landscape. And then they just finished a EIS. I believe it was just north of 100,000 acres, which is really unheard of within the agency, that deploys a variety of treatments. Unfortunately, grazing was one of the pieces. It was in the draft, and then it was taken out in the final piece because it was still one of those spots that was, I think the reality is probably too controversial still. And so they didn't want to stop the forward progress that they had made, if you will, on using some of the other treatments, some timber harvest, some hand thinning, some fire. So I am hopeful that I've been told that we're going to revisit this. I am very hopeful that we are going to, and that the agency is really going to look at cattle grazing as a tool, and probably one of the most holistic tools that we have in the toolkit, to either follow behind some of these treatments, do some restoration work, use it in post-fire scenarios, and just really begin to do it in a meaningful way. So I am hopeful.
All right. And you said it is a very holistic approach. It's a very natural approach to have the cattle out there taking care of some of that fire fuel. Um, there's still a lot of minds that need to be changed on this. Do you think we're making progress?
I do. And I've had conversations with some folks in places that they were just dead set against cattle. And now they're starting to look at how we're managing them and some of the success that we've seen with techniques that we can use with regards to herding and supplements and uh, the effectiveness that we've had in some areas with getting those fuels off and still maintaining some of the biological values that they hold near and dear. And I would say we all hold them near and dear. We want healthy landscapes. I think ranchers provide more habitat. It's that for different species. We see a lot of these same species on our winter ranches. And so I don't know that it's an either or. I think it's just a recognition of the value that ranchers play in this entire system.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that. Not that my opinion matters, but would you have any final thoughts for our listeners or any key points that you really want to make sure come across?
Yeah, I think that there is a wide recognition because of the devastation from these catastrophic fires that we have to do things in a better way. And I hope your listeners understand that one of the fastest and easiest ways we can get to success is utilizing cattle grazing as a real part of the answer. And so I think, unfortunately, the devastation has become so pervasive and so extreme that we're in a place where we're going to start trying to really use some of these tools in a more meaningful way.
All right, Sherry, thank you so much for all of the information and for taking some time today. It's an important topic, and I'm really glad that we got to talk about it today.
Yeah, and I appreciate you carrying the message.
This is the AgNet News Hour. I'm Sabrina Halverson. We'll be back in just a moment.
Welcome back to the AgNet News Hour. Here's Sabrina Halverson.
For this segment, we head over to Chuck Zimmerman.
At the NAFB Trade Talk, I'm visiting with Dan Gaddis. He's the chair for the Federation Division, and we're going to talk about beef here, of course, and that's some research that's been conducted there. And I want you to tell me a little bit about that, first of all.
Well, so the Federation of State Beef Councils obviously is made up of all the 43 qualified state beef councils across the nation. And, one of the things that we do as beef councils is invest back into a lot of our programs, one of the major ones being research. I think one of the things that we're excited most about right now is the research project that's ongoing regarding beef yield, red meat yield. When you really look at the two things that make up that, what is the value of a carcass, its quality, and then it's, how much actual yield you have out of that carcass. We have looked at quality for years and years and years, and in fact, we've really updated that whole process of how we grade quality probably 15 times since the 60s, whereas we have not upgraded the yield equation at all during that same period of time. And we know that cattle have changed. We know that, the breed makeup of those cattle have changed, the size of those cattle have changed, how we're feeding them, all of those different things are making that carcass very different. When you really look back to the 60s, what our live weight was one of those cattle is what our, actual hanging carcass weight is, today. So you're looking at a major difference there. So when you take that all the way back to the producer, what do you ultimately get paid for? You get paid for what is the product that you're producing, and that's made up what is the quality and how much of it is there. That equation on the beef yield really does go back to producers and trying to make sure that equation is in process to make sure they get paid for what they're producing. So what we're finding is through a lot of different technologies, we're able to make a better calculation, and really what we're looking at is trying to create that gold standard of a technology and equation to determine what the actual yield is out of a carcass, and to the point that we can start really looking at, not in a general sense, but as a specific sense to each of those carcasses, are there ways that we can measure to determine what the actual yield potential is from that actual carcass with the cattle that we're producing today.
How important is that to the cattlemen?
I think when you really look at the two things that make up the value proposition, and that being quality and then quantity, and that's what the red meat yield study is looking at, is what is the quantity of actual saleable cuts out of each carcass. I mean, that goes back to what the value is back to the producer. I think there's probably nothing more important than that, because if we can get that right, producers that are producing that high yield, high quality product can potentially get paid for that, rather than everybody paying everybody else on the average.
Is that information published out or where farmers can get it right now, or?
We are in the process of doing some talks on it. The complete study is not completely done yet. We're still looking at new, different technologies to utilize there. But what we're seeing in their initial results is very, very positive. And what we're seeing is that we're able to predict much, much better what the actual yield is of that carcass. When you look at what the original equation was and then kind of how we're doing things today, there's probably a 60 to 70% variation there that we had no understanding of what that real variation, and how to calculate that. We're able to, through the new technologies and looking at red meat yield and measurements, we're able to take most of that variation out of each carcass, and so that we know is what's actually being produced.
Well, before we close, anything else on this particular topic of the work that you're doing we didn't touch on?
Well, I think one of the important things is that these are our checkoff dollars at work, and that's a way for these dollars to be invested in research that ultimately goes back to the producer. Being able to try to make sure that the producer is compensated correctly. And the information that ultimately will come out from this research project will be absolutely public. It won't be it's not patent type of scenario, because these are public dollars that our producers are putting into place. And so I think that ultimately goes back and benefits the overall beef industry and especially our producers.
Well, thank you very much, Dan, for visiting with me here at the NAFB Trade Talk. I'm Chuck Zimmerman reporting.
What are some of the population, demographic, and economic trends found in USDA's latest edition of its annual reports focused on rural America? Rod Bain tells us.
One trend in the years following the COVID-19 pandemic, the continued growth of rural populations.
With a moderate increase over the last year, it's largely due to more people moving into rural areas than moving out, which is a trend that we saw definitely with the coronavirus pandemic.
Tracy Farragut of USDA's Economic Research Service, with information from the latest Rural America at a Glance report covering data from 2023. Yet the net increase by age reflects significant decreases in working age populations and significant increases in older populations in rural America over the past decade.
From 2010 to 2023, the number of working age people ages 15 to 64 decreased by 2 million, whereas the number of people ages 65 or older increased by 2.3 million. So in other words, the rural population growth over the last decade plus has been characterized by growth within the older population, which is largely tied to the aging of the baby boomer cohort past the age of 65, beginning in 2011.
Despite the trend of a lower working age population, rural employment numbers from 2022 to 23 grew to nearly pre-pandemic numbers of 2019.
Something that we saw last year as well, and that continued again over this past year, increasing again moderately 0.9% from 2022 to 2023. It was accompanied by record low unemployment rates, which were about 4% in 2023.
A closer look at the rural labor force over time indicates
overall, the rural labor force participation rate has been relatively flat in recent recent years. I have about the same amount of people in terms of percentage-wise who are participating in the labor market. But we've had increases in working age, but more so in late career and retirement age workers. For instance, the rural persons ages 55 or older were more likely to be employed or looking for employment in 2023 than those same age groups were in maybe say around 2015. The older age groups are tending to stay active in the rural labor market longer than they have for similar cohorts in the past.
14% of the total rural population in 2023 were working poor,
which is comprised of persons 16 years of age or older who spent at least 27 weeks out of the year in the labor force. They worked full-time or part-time, or they were looking for work, but their incomes fell below the official poverty level.
Continuing trends of rural part-time workers experiencing higher working poor rates compared to other workforce demographics.
Non-economic factors were the primary reasons for working part-time. This was across all age groups, rural or urban, such as childcare problems or other family or personal obligations, rather than economic factors, which is what we may tend to lean towards when we think about this, such as rural business conditions.
I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
This is the AgNet News Hour. I'm Sabrina Halverson. We'll be back in just a moment.
Welcome back to the AgNet News Hour. Here's Sabrina Halverson.
For this segment, we go to Chuck Zimmerman once again.
At the NAFB Trade Talk, I'm visiting with Ethan Lane with the NCBA. And Ethan, we're just coming through an election process, probably like we've never seen before. And tell us a little bit about, what's happening here in relative to what we've seen when it comes to the cattle industry.
Well, this is obviously a pretty pivotal election for a variety of reasons. That popular vote total, first time in more than 2 decades that a Republican candidate won the popular vote, brings along with it, the defeat of ballot propositions that were really harmful all across the country. The CAFO ban in Sonoma County, the slaughterhouse ban in Denver, the mountain lion hunting ban in Colorado. There was some really wacky stuff out there, and across the board, whether it be representatives that are friendly to the cattle industry, whether it be a president that we've worked with before, whether it be the defeat of radical animal rights action around the country, a tremendous election cycle. And I think now eyes turn to what can be done with this in this new administration, what can they do and how quickly to dispose of 4 years of the Biden administration's weird obsession with blaming grocery store prices on cattle producers, having meeting after meeting after meeting at the White House, trying to find someone to point fingers at, on any of these issues. It's a reset and a great opportunity with both houses of Congress in the same spot to kind of right the ship and maybe spend less time talking about politics and gridlock, right? And just get a few things done, get a farm bill passed, and let's all focus on something else for a little while. I think that's what everybody's sort of hoping for.
Yeah, I think there were still people not too long ago still thinking we could somehow push through a farm bill. I'm like, really?
I mean, honestly, I'm there now in lame duck. I wasn't before the election, and I am now. And I think my counterparts with other trade associations, particularly in the barnyard, are all kind of looking at this the same way at this point. You have this moment in time now where you've got a bill that passed out of the House Ag Committee on a bipartisan basis. 4 Democrats voted for it. Everybody in agriculture, everyone in this building right now likes that bill. They got the things that they needed. There's no harmful poison pills. G.T. Thompson deserves an incredible amount of credit for the work that he did putting that package together. And the objections we heard from the Democratic side of the aisle maybe aren't nearly as bad looking at what they might be dealing with next Congress as they've been the last few months. So I think there are a lot of us that feel like maybe there's a moment in time here where they could put the pieces together and get this cleared off the decks before we go into the 119th Congress. And we would certainly advocate for that.
What else would be of interest in terms of what we've seen happen? Because it's going very fast to fill in some of these important positions. And
there's going to be a heavy focus on nominations and filling out the president's cabinet in the first 100 days. But there's been discussion for months about how to tackle the tax package that's expiring. The best case scenario was exactly what we're looking at, which is Republican control of the House, the Senate, and the White House. Because remember, this is the Trump tax package from 2017. This is his product. So he, I think, is going to be very focused on getting that renewed, whether that's through the budget reconciliation process or elsewhere. I think that's going to be a priority right out of the gate. Certainly for agriculture, there's too much at risk here if we don't get those tax levels preserved by the end of this year. It's always, you hear people who are opposed to it calling it new tax cuts, and that's not a fair way to say it, because it's the rates that people are dealing with now, right? It's preserving the current levels. So I think that's going to be a fairly dominant conversation, and particularly so if they're able to do something with the Farm Bill and get that off everybody's plates.
All right, before we close, anything else you want to touch on that we didn't?
I think this is going to be an interesting couple years, particularly since this coalition that elected the president has some newcomers that don't view agriculture the way a traditional Republican has viewed agriculture. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. being in the mix adds a new wrinkle, and it's something that I think we're going to really need to take seriously in American agriculture. We have the science. We produce the safest, most abundant food supply in the known universe, and that is not an exaggeration. It's going to be really important for us to hammer that home, to educate those folks in the administration that don't understand that. We know that the president does. We know that he is a major champion of American agriculture, but we need to take that conversation seriously. We need to show up, and we need to make sure that we come with our facts and figures and our science to show what an incredible job the U.S. cattle industry does and U.S. agriculture does.
All right, well, thank you very much, Ethan, for visiting with me here at the NAFB Trade Talk. I'm Chuck Zimmerman reporting. At the NAFB Trade Talk, I'm visiting with Donnell Rehagen. And Don, first of all, tell me a little bit about clean fuels and the conference that you've got coming up.
Yeah, we have our annual conference coming up January 20th to 23rd in San Diego, California. We always enjoy taking our show out to California. California is our single largest market for our fuels, and so we're going to be happy to be there. And we bring the industry together that time of the year, and it lets them put deals together, talk about the issues. We do a good job educating folks on what's happening and kind of kick the year off. So we're excited about it.
So registration's open, right?
Registrations are open. You can go to cleanfuelsconference.org, and registrations are open. Hotel blocks are open. So, go there now. We'd love to see you in San Diego.
Well, tell us a little bit about some of the sessions and maybe keynotes that you know of that are already booked.
Yeah, we have a number of breakout sessions, kind of education specific to things like technical improvements that are being made either to the fuels, engine technology. Diesel engines are changing here in a couple of years. We're going to be talking about that. A couple of our keynotes that we're really happy to have. We have the CEO of Union Pacific is going to be speaking to our group. We see the rail industry as being a large emerging market for our fuels, and she's going to be there to talk about Union Pacific's role there. We're also going to have the top executive from CARB will be visiting with us, which is very timely considering everything that's been going on in California with the LCFS. So we're excited about the lineup we have.
How about as far as the attendance on this? How's that been doing?
Well, we've been growing a little bit again over the last several years. Our industry has grown. We're now a 5 billion gallon a year industry. We've doubled in size in the last 4 years. And so we're starting to see an uptick in registrations and people that are coming in a little bit new to the industry again, and that's fun for us, to see that. So we're expecting to have probably about 1,000 people gather in San Diego.
Do you have some slots still where you have some speakers that maybe just haven't been set up or announced yet?
Yeah, on our conference website, again, cleanfuelsconference.org, we have the full lineup. We have almost all of our sessions set up. Our speakers are selected. You'll be able to go there and see who we put together on each of those sessions and those educational opportunities.
We'll hope for some great weather, because it usually is when we've been in San Diego. I can't think of a time when it hasn't been. But we'll look forward to that. So that's the Clean Fuels Alliance America and their conference, which will be taking place soon. Here from the NAFB Trade Talk, I'm Chuck Zimmerman.
This is the AgNet News Hour. We'll be back in just a moment.
Welcome back to the AgNet News Hour. Here's Sabrina Halverson.
We are wrapping up the day today with some ag news. The Western Agricultural Processors Association reports that last week, Chris McLaughlin, the association's Director of Technical Services, addressed the San Joaquin Valley Air Pollution Control District's annual study session. The meeting brings together stakeholders to discuss air quality regulations and strategies. During a press conference, McLaughlin emphasized the importance of programs like the Tractor Trade-In Initiative, which supports farmers in replacing older equipment with cleaner alternatives. He also spoke about the challenges facing agriculture, including low commodity prices, difficult export markets, and increasingly strict restrictions. Despite these hurdles, he highlighted the industry's commitment to reducing emissions. During the session, the Air Resources Board and EPA Region 9 acknowledged the Valley's success in meeting air quality standards. They credited the agricultural sector for its rapid adoption of cleaner technology, which exceeded emission reduction goals ahead of schedule. Holiday shoppers are likely to find the lowest prices in years for turkeys. Gary Crawford has more.
And now, to introduce the subject of today's story, a classic film director known far and especially wide. Everybody knows him. What was your name again?
My name is Alfred Hitchcock.
Oh, yes.
And I would like to tell you about the birds and their age-long relationship with man.
Oh, goody.
I suspect you never realized that if it weren't for birds, even some of our pastimes would suffer noticeably. Duck hunting, for example, and the turkey is traditionally our guest of honor at Thanksgiving.
Ah, yes, now we're getting to the subject of the Thanksgiving turkey. Now, I realize it seems a bit early to start reporting about the cost of that turkey, but everybody else is doing it, so let's gobble up this opportunity. And actually, when it comes to what we shoppers can expect to pay for that Thanksgiving turkey,
people who are shopping for turkeys for their holidays are likely going to see some good deals out there.
That's Agriculture Department economist Mike McConnell, and when he says good deals, he's not exaggerating.
Yeah, I think the main thing to note about turkey prices this year is at the wholesale level, we've seen dramatically lower prices in 2024 compared to what we were seeing in 2023 and 2022.
And here's a prime example of that.
The representative USDA hen price that we use for the month of October was actually 17% lower than it was in 2023.
And October is often when many supermarkets are stocking up, buying their turkeys from wholesalers to sell during the holidays. And as we heard earlier, supermarkets have been paying a lot less for those turkeys.
In 2024, we're forecasting the average hen price to be 94 cents per pound. That's in comparison to last year where we had an average of $1.40 per pound. So, a pretty stark decline.
McConnell says it's been a bit of a stark time for the folks who raise the turkeys, too. Back in 2022, when prices for turkey and almost everything else peaked at very high levels, consumer demand for turkey slowed down, causing a buildup of turkey supplies and a reduction in prices. Meanwhile, consumer demand has remained fairly weak, and producers have been cutting production to match.
So in 2024, the USDA forecasts that turkey production will be 5.1 billion pounds. That's in comparison to 2023 when we saw about 5.5 billion pounds of production. So that means we're expecting turkey production to be about 6% lower than it was in 2023.
But supplies of turkeys in cold storage continue to be large, causing prices to fall at wholesale and retail. Mike McConnell's been scanning hundreds and hundreds of supermarket sale ads across the country featuring turkeys.
Looks like the level of features for turkeys is much higher this year in 2024 compared to last year.
More stores are putting more turkeys on sale, offering more discounts on those birds. Meanwhile, at the McConnell home, they are doing what they can to help turkey producers.
We have a pretty big family meal, so we actually have multiple turkeys that go in front of our family.
Multiple turkeys, wow. This is Gary Crawford reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
That's our show for today. I'm Sabrina Halverson. This is the AgNet News Hour. Thank you for sharing your morning with us.
To get more information on the topics you heard today, visit AgNet West at agnetwest.com. You can also stay connected by following us on our social media at AgNet West on Facebook, Instagram, and X. Also look for Sabrina Halverson on Facebook, and be sure to subscribe to our podcast by searching for AgNet West on your podcast app. Thank you for listening to the AgNet News Hour from AgNet West. AgNet West Radio Network, your primary choice for agriculture news.